Gojo Satoru is easily one of, if not the most broken character in all of Jujutsu Kaisen, but his teaching skills and fatherly figure skills that really needs quite a bit of work. So what would have happened if Itadori, our main character in the vessel for Sakuna, was raised by Satoru Gojo? Would he know how to handle Itadori, a child with tremendous potential, or would a younger Gojo struggle with mentoring the future Jujutsu sorcerer? We are going to find out in this What If Itadori Was Raised by Gojo episode / part, whatever you guys would like to call it, but follow for more to actively see exactly what's going to be going on with this. To get this scenario started off, let's actively go into the backstory. So for this, Yuji's grandfather this time around would die at a much earlier age compared to the normal actual story. Instead of dying when Yuji's 15, this time he would die when Yuji's 5. And with the death and all of the things that bring in the hospital, there would be a cursed spirit being around that area. With all of that, it would cause Gojo to actively come over to where everything is happening, and Yuji just happened to be there during that day. So with all of that kind of happening, it automatically leads Gojo to just witnessing Itadori automatically just kind of doing some little maneuvers and some actual fighting, just trying to avoid and escape all of the grasps of any of the cursed spirits that are trying to even get anywhere near him. He's seeing that this kid has incredible strength and agility for somebody his age, and automatically finds this very interesting and finds him kind of like a kindred spirit. So Gojo thinks and talks to himself and thinks about to himself and decides to actively adopt him and everything else like that. As Yuji doesn't have an actual family anymore, that's basically all that he had. So he's basically now just going to be living with Gojo, being raised by him as kind of like a pseudo father figure and everything else like that. The next thing that we have to really talk about is the younger years for Itadori and Gojo's relationship. For most of this, it's going to be Gojo really trying to delve into and actively taking in the responsibility of having this kind of child that he's actively putting in and raising. Gojo already has this immense amount of abilities and all of these insane amount of things that he can do, and he's still trying to at least get everything completely figured out with all of the things that he needs to do already. But he's almost completely gotten everything straightened out. He's almost mastered his own abilities. So he already knows that Itadori has extreme potential. So he's trying to make sure to unlock it all to the best of his abilities. So that's exactly what he does. From the moment that Yuji is actually taken into his care, he starts making sure that he trains Yuji, putting him through grueling training, but actively still taking care of him, making sure that he's treated like a kid, because obviously this is still Gojo. He acts the exact same way, so he's gonna still completely have like that very closely brotherly bond, honestly, in almost any actual circumstance of the word. It's more of a brotherly relationship because there might be a decent amount of time, like ages in between, but it's still just enough that it's a little differently than everything and how everything would normally be going. Itadori's still just so young and hasn't really learned anything yet, so he has so much time to actively learn cursed techniques and cursed energy, and that's exactly what Gojo trains him on. He has him learning cursed techniques, cursed energy, and just has him learning everything that he can. And with Itadori's actual development and everything else that can go around, he's getting it extremely well, extremely quickly, and as time goes along, it just shows it all out. As now we talk about Sakuna and everything that happens there. With these events specifically, I honestly could see them going either way, with either them just being able to get Sakuna's finger very easily, but that wouldn't be any fun. So the way that I want to think about it is maybe possibly one of the other two members in the occult club, I'm just going to say that they gained a third member just from somebody else that wanted to join a club but didn't want to do anything. They managed to actively come in, find somebody, and they still managed to find Sakuna's finger, and all of those events still happen almost the exact same way, identically. This time around, Yuji and Megumi would be sent over there to just grab Sakuna's finger. They don't both need to be there, but Yuji just didn't really have anything to do at that point in time, so he just chose to come along with Megumi for no reason whatsoever besides the fact that he was just kind of bored. They notice that Sakuna's finger isn't there, and all of that still kind of happens, and they're just basically trying to at least figure out what they should be doing. They're just trying to figure out like where it could possibly be, and they spend a good decent amount of time just trying to look for it. Most of those events actively end up kind of going to the same way, and since they don't really have any connection to any of the students like the way that they did, they eventually find one of the students that is in the Hold Club the same way that they did with Yuji. And this time around, it basically just goes quite a little bit similar in the story-wise until they finally get the fact that they're going to be opening Sakuna, like the actual Sakuna's finger thing and everything else like that, and all of those events are going on like that. So basically, everything kind of just happens similarly to the way that it happened in canon. It eventually gets to the point where they make it back to the school, and they notice that, like, obviously all of these curses are all over the place, just completely bombarding the area and things like that. And they've already noticed that this is going to be a fairly difficult challenge, because this is going to at least obviously still be the curses that they had to deal with. And obviously, even with Yuji being a lot stronger, honestly, this is still going to be a little much for both of them to be dealing with, especially even though that they can do a lot of this. With the amount of curses that are going to be just basically bombarding them, it's still going to cause such a great amount of turmoil, specifically in all the things like that, due to the fact of just how everything would end up actively playing out, in all honesty. So we still get to the point where Yuji is they're both completely, like Yuji and Megumi are just both completely just trying to work out one of the cursed spirits, and eventually, like, Sakuna's finger is already completely opened, and Yuji knows that there's only like one chance that he has to do this, and he ends up just choosing to bite Sakuna's finger, eat Sakuna's finger, and leads to the events of everything, obviously, and kind of the story going a similar path down that way. He had no choice besides to eat it, because he knew that he had a decent amount of cursed energy. I mean, he had extreme high amounts of cursed energy, but the actual spirit, like the cursed spirit that he was going against this time, was one that he didn't actively have a stronger chance of fighting than he would have actively thought that he would have. So he knew this was probably his only chance of getting both of them and everybody out here safe and secure. He knew this is going to cause problems for him, but he didn't care about that for right now. After all of those events take place, we basically get the situation of Gojo still coming around, all of that still happening, and Gojo just bringing back Itadori with him. This time around, he could tell that Itadori was still completely sane fairly instantly, because he's basically raised him for so long, and then afterwards, he just boinks Itadori straight on the forehead, knocks him out. Itadori's fine with that because he understood this was going to happen, and they wake up in that same room that Itadori woke up in the first time. Gojo completely automatically starts just like making sure that Itadori's okay and everything else like that, and make sure that everything is like perfectly going fine. And then he starts asking him like the actual real questions, like what was he thinking about doing this, like why and what could have possibly brought him to actually thinking that this was a good idea. Itadori like gives him his actual like viewpoint of what happened, and Megumi could obviously concur that the exact same thing happened, and they weren't going to actually be able to completely win if they did nothing, as the fact that he's still completely sane and everything else like that still makes everything simple, really. Gojo managed to talk to all of the elders, because obviously this would be grounds for like automatic just like kill him right there and right then. But obviously Gojo wasn't going to have that. He was not having that whatsoever. This is not somebody that they know that Gojo's going to even think about even letting die. Like, most of these people have known Itadori for a good long time because he's been training with Gojo for so long. So most of these people know him fairly decently well and everything else like that. So they don't want to kill him. They don't want to actively have anything else like that happen. But they still talk about, like, since he's going to be a perfect vessel anyways, they still talk about him actively possibly eating the rest of Sakuna's fingers and everything else like that. And Itadori right now is fairly decently stronger than what Itadori was in canon. So he is actively going to be able to take at least in a few more of Sakuna's fingers off bat without any real problems. But afterwards, of all of that's done, Itadori's brought back to actively like Jujutsu tech and everything else like that, and he is actively just like completely like just let be fine. He says hello to Megumi and everything else like that, and they know that they have to go on and grab their third member for their team. their third member for like at least the actual thing that they're about to have to do. So they're just completely prepared to have to yeet out for at least a little bit to go find this person and everything else like that. They would head off to go get Nobara the same way that they did, and like just go over and just go find her exactly like where they actively needed to go to. And they find her the exact same way, trying to get that like recruitment and seeing everything else like that. See, just like her, just trying to get like recruited by people and everything else like that, which obviously isn't working in what any case scenario wouldn't work, couldn't work, and it could never be, and everything else like that. As she's introduced to Megumi and Itadori, and obviously Itadori this time around actively knowing a fair bit more about like actual curses and everything in like the Jujutsu world. She isn't like thinking like this is like just like some complete newbie and everything else like that. As with all of that, Gojo still ends up deciding to actually test her after like they actually get to do all of the other things and everything else like that. She still decides to test her by bringing both her and Yuji over to an actual just what was it, that building that they knew that there was a cursed like spirit inside of next to the cemetery. And so Gojo brings them there and asks like just Yuji to actively go in there with her and everything else like that. Megumi is still a little injured, but not even close to as much as he was, but they both enter and it actively goes quite a bit better, because obviously Gojo tells Itadori make sure not to use Sakuna in any instance. And Itadori already knows this, so wasn't planning on using him, but he already has his own curse technique, so he doesn't need him. We need to worry about it. And this is still Yuji, so he still has the same amount of strength. He still has the same amount of actual abilities that he normally would have. Actually, it's probably heightened because of the fact that he's been training with Gojo. So his strength, speed, and agility, all of those things that made Yuji is even more heightened than it was, which is honestly crazy to say, but it's true. As most of the events inside of there go similarly, since Itadori actively knows quite a bit more, he's actually able to convince Nobara to actively create the strategy and create an actual team strategy and everything else like that. So it actually goes way better. And with his still crazy strength, they are able to deal with that cursed spirit so much easier without any actual hassle, without any problem and everything else like that. But afterwards, Gojo now knowing that she's insane, she's crazy like the rest of them, it makes it a little better and everything else like that, as that would lead up into the events of the next event. And then the final part that we're going to discuss is the prison incident, where Yuji, Megumi, and Nobara all go over to the prison just to kind of figure out what's going on. They've heard that there was just like this very big catastrophe just going on, and like they've heard like just people being able to actively see like the cursed spirit without actually being Jujutsu sorcerers and things like that. So it was obviously kind of confusing, but they're still extremely short-staffed, so they still end up sending these 3 kids to be actively the ones to deal with this. Obviously, this is still way above their pay grade by miles, and even though like Yuji has been training for so long, he's still not really able to completely like take down like special grade or first grade things very easily. And even with the help that he's going to be having, it's still going to be a very big challenge. Yuji knows what's going on, and even Gojo would know what's going on. They are like the people at B are just trying to find any singular ways to have Yuji be taken out in any instant that makes it look like it wasn't their fault, because they know Gojo is a very big threat. So they're just trying to make sure that anything that happens can't really be tied back to them, just could be tied back to like short-staffed or just not really having too many people around. So they're just trying to do every single thing that they can to not have the blame fall on them, as that's exactly what they end up doing. And so all 3 of them go in, and Megumi already has his like actual dogs completely ready and everything else like that. Most of that beginning portion starts off the exact same way. They find the prisoner on the actual ground already completely gone and dead, and then eventually they kind of get like, a little separated, and then they have it be where almost the exact same instance happened, where Yuji just tells Megumi to go off, find Nobara, and like send him a signal the same way that he did in canon. But this time around, like he automatically like just talks to Sakuna because he's not like losing an arm the same way that he is. He wasn't as injured as he automatically was. So he's not like really truly injured very much. He has still a very good, decent amount of strength left, but he knows he won't be able to deal with this. So he automatically goes to Sakuna for asking for help. They kind of like have a little small, quick conversation, and Yuji just tells like Sakuna, just deal with this. And like obviously Sakuna's not trying to have that, and he's trying to figure out like whatever he can do to actively just like not have to deal with this. But obviously we'll just see exactly how that ends up. They eventually switch places, and Sakuna automatically just starts trying to at least deal with whatever he wants to do instead of being or listening to anything else like that. He automatically goes just like telling the special grade to follow him, but obviously the special grade's still extremely scared of Sakuna, so that fight still ends up ensuing the same way that it would have. Almost all of this goes almost everything in this actual event goes the exact same way as planned, well, as in canon, besides the fact that it's just basically a little easier for everything to go along. Yuji was able to deal with the actual, like the special grade for quite a bit longer. And as soon as, like after he heard like Megumi's actual signal, he was able to actually go pretty far in and just switched it with Sukuna very, very quickly without any actual real drawback or without any real problem or real hassle. But the same problem arises after Sakuna's already dealt with the actual special grade, taking his finger back and eating it. The same problem arises with Yuji not responding and not automatically switching back. As the main reason that this is happening is because at this point, Yuji had already had and eaten around 3 fingers strictly before even like taking that last one in. So now that he's at like around 4 fingers and things like that, he's actively a little, it's just like his body's a little, not like overwhelmed to say the least, but his body's just trying to actively compensate for that and he's just trying to at least make sure to keep some kind of control because he needs to kind of strengthen up his own mind and things like that. So it's just kind of a little more of a hassle to deal with it. But Sakuna still ends up going out, noticing that Yuji's not actually responding and things like that. And all of those events still happen to where he even ends up going into a fight against Megumi and everything else like that, ripping out Yuji's heart and the same thing else like that. And obviously Megumi is completely distraught and things like that. But for the most part, all of that goes the exact same way. Megumi is able to deal with a decent amount and everything else like that. And eventually Yuji's able to take back control at the last second and actively gain back his control, but it's already too late and his heart's already been ripped out. So it's still just that situation where he really can't do anything as of that moment. He's basically already dead, but so he just wanted to make sure Megumi didn't get injured because of his own mistakes, his own problems, and the own things that he was about to do. But afterwards, obviously, we get into just the little last-ish part that doesn't really count like as an entire full section, and that's just Sakuna and Yuji inside of Yuji's mind after they've already been brought back into the morgue before anything have actually happened. And Gojo's just looking at there and just really extremely sad because like this kid, like his basic little brother has just like passed away and died. But he died, at least he knows that he died trying to make sure that he didn't actually hurt anybody and made sure that Sakuna didn't actually do anything that would have been too much of a very big problem. So Sakuna and Itadori, now in Itadori's actual, well, Sakuna's innate domain inside of their body and everything else like that, they're talking. They're automatically having just a little fight because obviously Yuji thinks that he's dead and things like that. But eventually he calms down and Sakuna gives him the same deal that he was talking about in actual canon. This time, Yuji's not completely opposed to it because he understands that they know that this is going to eventually, there's always going to be more problems if they don't at least come up with at least a good strategy on dealing with all of this. So they go back and forth this time around instead. Yuji's not saying that he's gonna completely disagree with anything that he actually Sakuna's gonna even be talking about. He'll say that he'll agree to having a key phrase that when Sakuna wants to switch, they can switch for a minute and everything else like that. He'll agree to that and he'll have no problems with that. That's all going to be completely perfectly fine. The rule of no killing anybody, no harming anybody, that's all going to be completely perfectly fine. He agrees with all of that, but he also wants to make sure that he remembers that he made this deal, but can't talk, will say that he promised that he will not talk about it, because at least wants to know why all of this is happening and everything else like that. And they eventually come to an actual decently fair compromise. They do end up actually still having an actual match this time around, but it doesn't end the same way that it did. The only reason they even end up having the match is one, Yuji just wants to have actually test out Sakuna's strength, since they're actually going to be here anyways, and two, just so they could actually figure out who's going to get the better end of the rules, Yuji or actually Sakuna. But for this, Yuji doesn't automatically just die because Sakuna just cuts his head off the way that he did, and just split his head open the way that he did. This time, Yuji's actively putting up a fight. Sakuna could tell, and actually Sakuna could actively notice that this is actually somewhat fairly challenging. Yuji is out here actively doing some things that Sakuna wasn't expecting, because he just has that amount of strength within inside of him. He has that amount of strength and things like that. So Sakuna is obviously automatically surprised, but he still does end up winning, not killing Yuji, but to the point that Yuji's just out of commission for a little bit, and Sakuna gets the better end of the deals, but not by much, because they both had basically already agreed on everything, and Sakuna at least agreed to let Yuji actively remember the rules and everything else like that, but just not be able to speak on it and speak about it in any kind of means entirely, just to kind of help them out. And now they have more of the mutual agreement on everything and how everything is supposed to work. But this is where I'm going to be leaving this video off. If you guys did enjoy this basic first part, or just this video entirely, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel. I hope that you guys did enjoy the new editing style and the actual things that I did with this video. But I will see you on the next video, and I'll see you on the next thing. Peace.